let's start. And to begin with, I'll just do a brief intro about myself. I'm Camellia from O'Shaughnessy's Venture. I'm in charge of the content and also part of the fellowship committee. And for today's salon, join me with Dr. Sandro Luna. He's a physician and head tech founder, also our fellowship award winner from last year. So in today's session, we're going to talk about his experience with the OSV fellowship and also his groundbreaking project. So Dr. Sandro Luna, can you give us a brief introduction about yourself and how your journey into the OSV fellowship?
Sure, and thank you for the quick introduction. Thank you everybody for being here. It's really nice to see everyone. Again, I'm Sandro. You can call me Sandro. And as was mentioned just a couple seconds ago, I started my OSV fellowship in 2023. It was awarded almost 11 months ago now, in July 2023, for a project that I'm still working on full time, which is called MAVE. And MAVE is building software that you can run on mobile devices such as a smartphone, so that you can measure items such as vital signs or biomarkers. With our key ones right now looking at blood pressure. So that's really interesting to me, coming from a medical background, and the technological challenge of capturing blood pressure from just a video. So I've got a video camera right now, and in the future, I want MAVE to be able to capture blood pressure, other vital signs just from this video recording right there. The inspiration for MAVE really started in medical school. So there's two sides to this. One is the clinical side, of course, meeting patients, treating patients with the team that you work on in medical school, figuring out what the root issue is of why they came into the hospital or why they came into the clinic. And unlike a show that I love, there's shows like The Resident or Grey's Anatomy, these very medical heavy shows, which incorporate a lot of drama. Unlike those shows, most of the reasons why people are admitted to a hospital or come to a clinic and see a doctor is not because of these, random acts or mysterious cancers or zebra diagnoses that usually occur in the medical shows. But unfortunately, and I'm talking about the USA specifically, most of the reasons why, and that is 80 to 85 to 90% of the conditions or why someone comes to the hospital is usually because of 5 preventable conditions. And that is related to heart disease or cardiovascular disease. We think about obesity and the metabolic related diseases, stroke, cerebrovascular diseases, and diabetes as well. So there's a really great physician on social media who's now very popular. His name is Dr. Peter Attia, and he wrote a whole book about this called Outlive. And it's a great book. I recommend you read it. He refers to these types of metabolic lifestyle diseases as, the 4 horsemen, because it really catches up to everybody. And it's not these, flip a switch, you're diagnosed with something that's incurable. It's these more indolent, growing concerns that don't just happen overnight, but they happen over years due to a variety of different lifestyle and environmental factors that end up causing most of the morbidity and mortality, the death and harm in the United States. So if we just take cardiovascular diseases, for example, the most recent estimates are that 900,000 people annually are pass away due to cardiovascular diseases. And the highest risk for cardiovascular diseases, as we think about it, is 1, high blood pressure. So that's the instinct for why I wanted to develop blood pressure first for MAVE, but also the fact that we have a lot of medical devices and fancy equipment and technologies that I learned through my hospital experiences usually end up in the closet when they're prescribed to patients. And there's actually this very well-defined phenomenon of medical devices ending up dusty in a closet somewhere because either they were too cumbersome or they were hard to manage or they were too expensive to keep adding the widgets that you needed every day or every month. And separate story, and then I'll stop. talking.
And
Throughout
go.
college, this idea of video and patients and medical technology was very intriguing to me because I was actually a documentary producer in college, and then into medical school on patient stories and wellness and health. And so what I'm doing now with Maeve is really a combination of those video, film production, documentary experiences, plus the medical background, and plus the this kind of necessary technological background that I've developed over the past 10 years now. So that's
Yeah.
the inspiration for Maeve, and that's really why I'm working on this because it is one of the most pressing issues for people in the United States to get a manage of their what Peter Tia calls the four horsemen, and you have to know about it before you can start to treat it. And people don't know about it. Half of the people who have hypertension don't know that they do. They walk into a clinic, no idea. So
Mm.
that's the inspiration.
Yeah. So can you explain the science and technology behind how is measure the vital signs without the need for additional sensor?
Yeah, so the easiest way to explain it is that if you've ever been to your regular doctor's checkup or primary care office, they probably attached a little sensor to your finger or the pulse oximeter. And all that pulse oximeter is doing is shooting a specific type of laser wavelength through the tip of your finger. And if you've ever held up like an iPhone flashlight to the back of your finger, you see that it illuminates your finger. So it kind of goes right through. It's not completely solid. Light goes through. And what the
Mm.
pulse oximeter is doing there when you get it attached and they're measuring your heart rate and oxygen saturation is that it's shining that laser and using the absorption and reflection with the knowledge of how it's being absorbed or reflected by the specific tissues and blood in your finger. And from that, the pulse oximeter calculates one, the heart rate. It can see this pulse. And if you ever look next time you visit your doctor's office, usually the machine or whatever device they're using to capture the oxygen saturation will show you the pulse. And
Mm.
often when we used to visit COVID patients in the hospital, 2020, 2021, when I was in New York, an important thing we would always check for is, okay, how does the actual pulse waveform look, right? Because you could have a weak pulse or a very strong visible pulse on that machine. And that was something that my bosses, the attending doctors who led the medical teams, often really cared about when they were looking at the pulse oximeter. So I say all that because the pulse oximeter is extracting what is essentially a pulse waveform from the tip of your finger. And it's possible to capture a pulse waveform, not just from your finger, but from other surfaces of the body. So one popular one in the literature is the face, because in your face you have tiny, fragile, but very visible blood vasculature, these tiny little blood vessels that can actually give off that same pulse waveform, just like the blood's flowing through your finger. But in the case of the facial regions, what I'm interested in and what a couple other research groups have been interested in is, okay, we know it exists there, but how do you actually capture that pulse waveform? Are we supposed to just attach, a pulse oximeter to your face? Are we supposed to clip it to your cheek? And while that technically might be possible, what the video cameras can do on modern devices, such as I have an iPhone right here with me today. You can't see it there, but what an iPhone can do, for example, is take a very high quality video of, in this case, the facial region. And although your eyes can't see that blood pulsing every couple seconds, throughout the day, the camera can actually see that with extra manipulations of the video, and you can actually get the pulsation. So that's the essence of how a technology like Mave works, is working from that
Mm.
pulse-based kind of color recognition that we can't see every day with just our normal human eyes, but cameras are really good and can actually see that.
Yeah. So I have a Apple Watch, and
Yeah.
they also measure the blood oxygen and some other stuff. I wonder, would that be similar or? Would you consider Apple Watch your competitor? Or...
So Apple Watch, and the Fitbit, and there's a bunch of other similar
Yeah.
ones. I think Apple Watch would be the most popular
Mm.
by market share. Uh, they work on the same principle of the blood flow waveforms, but in the case of a watch or a band, Fitbit, etc., they are coming into contact with your skin. So there's benefits and drawbacks to the way it does that. And if you take your Apple Watch off and look at the back of the watch, you'll see that it's shooting some type of green laser. There's about three of them that shoot right
Yeah.
into your wrist area, and then Apple, uh, has its own calibrations for how it works with that. So one, it's contact. It has to touch your skin. You can't hold it up to your wrist and just say like, "Hey, measure my blood oxygen." Another interesting part of that, though, because you bring up competition, if you check now, your Apple Watch likely does not allow you to measure blood oxygen saturation because of a very not really high profile in the health tech realm battle between Apple and a company called Massimo. So basically, long story short, Massimo was another company developing blood oxygen saturation measurements from some type of band. They were developing their own band. And I believe this was I want to say 4 or 5 or 6 years ago, where they met with Apple executives and their health team, and they were going to do some type of partnership or collaboration, maybe thought about an acquire deal of some sort. Ended up not working, but then Apple actually, according to what's been published, allegedly, Apple or whatever team had kind of poached some of the talent and some of the technology capabilities from Massimo, and then employed it for their Apple Watch release in the last 2 years. And then Massimo fought back and said, "Hey, this is actually our patents. You can't do this. It's so similar, legal patent ordeal." And then Apple just recently, I believe it was 2023, because I was looking at it as soon when I was received the award from OSV, the same thing happened at the same time. And then Massimo actually won. Apple had to rescind its blood oxygen capabilities for the time being because of this legal patent concern. So it's interesting because for me, coming from a medical background, MD, I want everyone to have some kind of capability like this, whether it's the watch, if they like a watch, whether it's in the future, Mave running from an iPhone. So to me, there is so much need, literally hundreds of millions of people just in the US. And then if you think about abroad internationally, there's so many people who need and can benefit from tracking their health signs in this way that it's really not a matter of competition or who does what. It's really, does the company who's making this specific thing have the technology work accurately as they say it does for clinical use according to whatever US FDA or international standards that are required, so that the reading that a patient or any regular person gets from it is reliable and accurate and repeatable and actually can give them informed choices about how they can improve their health, right? So I think it's good that Apple has all these things. I'm trying to develop all very similar readings without the contact, without having to wear anything, just from video. And there's a lot of steps to get there, because even with, I think the biggest example always comes back to Apple because it's the most well known. It's the biggest company, but even for them, it takes a lot of time evaluating the medical technology that even a big company can't get around. And sometimes it's easier when you're a smaller company to navigate the medical approval processes, which is a whole other ordeal. I don't know if anyone else is interested in that, but it's there's so many steps that even Goliaths have to respect.
Okay. How do you think May could be used in a large-scale public health initiative or during health crisis such as a pandemic, like how would that maybe contribute to a huge impact for this sector?
That's a good question. And that's a question that came up a lot during COVID, just with the existing tools that physicians had. So there was a lot of physicians in the hospital that had the question of, okay, can we send our patient populations just the hardware versions of these tools? Send them a pulse ox, send them a blood pressure monitor, send them a heart rate monitor. Can we mail it out to thousands of people and say if their measurement is within this certain window, can we then bring them into the hospital? Or if the measurement's in a certain window, can we send them some medication as a way to triage and kind of be proactive with care? And so I think a tool like Mave, software that can in the future run on devices just with a video camera, makes that process a lot less complicated. There's less logistics involved with giving someone an application on their phone versus sending them a box full of dedicated hardware that also costs a lot, but it's hard to send packages to thousands of people or millions of people if you're a really big healthcare institution and you have a lot of people in your population. So it definitely can work under that scenario. If we think about COVID, we always were interested in what is their blood oxygen saturation, what is their heart rate, what is their blood pressure, what is their temperature, the 4 core vital signs when we can start to notice some type of desaturation in case of the O2 or some kind of decline of a patient. And so with that, I'd say it's definitely applicable there or any future type of scenarios where you just need to know the status of people quickly. And often the quickest way you can kind of reach people is via the device that they have in their pocket all the time.
Yeah. So could you discuss some partnership or collaborations that have been a very crucial part to the development of Mave?
Yes. So for me, and then wrapping it or tying it back into the OSV fellowship, the most important component of developing Mave for me is that my responsibility is to get the readings, the measurements, blood pressure, for example, within a clinically accurate and repeatable range. And there's guidelines accepted internationally for this. One of them is called the ISO guideline, International Standards for Standards Organization. And that is part of the formula on how you get approved as an official medical device. So there's actually 2 sides to this. And it relates back to the existing devices on the market versus what can be prescribed officially by a doctor or a clinician. Anyone can create some type of software algorithm or wristband wearable and say, this measures your heart rate and here's our data and buy our product. There's a caveat if it's not approved by, in the US, the Food and Drug Administration, they can just put a little asterisk and say, these claims have not been evaluated by the FDA. This is not an approved product, and this is for general wellness use. And so that general wellness use essentially means that it hasn't been approved. The accuracy of that thing has not been approved, right? And so there's this line where I don't think a lot of the healthcare conscious consumers realize if there's a device on the market that says it does heart rate measurement, blood pressure measurement, it could do those things and it could do them well, but there's no proof or accuracy data to back it up, right? So I could release Mave and say, hi, please buy Mave, health systems, consumers, sell it directly to people. It measures heart rate, blood pressure, all these things, with a huge asterisk that it's not backed up by the full, faith of the FDA to say it works in this way. So for me, I'm not interested in that category of health wellness products and just to release it, at any stage. I'm very interested in making sure it's at the level that I need it to be if I was going to give it to a patient. And so that is the standard that I'm using in terms of the research and development to make sure that when it's ready, it's actually going to be trusted by both the patient and the doctor, nurse, pharmacist who might be using it with their patient.
Yeah, because I know Apple gather a lot of health data from me, but I don't know how to read it. So can you walk me through the whole journey? If I'm a Mave user, what's the user journey look like?
When you say your Apple Watch data collects stuff that you don't
I
know what
don't
it
know
does.
how to read it because I don't know if you are familiar with the Apple. So there's a health,
Uh-huh.
like, yeah, and you click it, there's so many data available, but I don't know how to read them. So basically, I
Mm.
have no idea what are those used for. So yeah, so I wonder like how is a May would be different. Can you walk me through the user journey? Like,
I see, I see. So two parts to that question. One is how the data is presented in the user interface. And I think, Apple has its consumer facing data sharing, it'll
mm,
tell you one thing, but it also has a lot of back end data collection that might be more complicated that they're not really intending for people to see. It's more for their own purposes, for other research, or maybe, I don't know. So there's one part on distinguishing different technologies or different products based on just the user interface. And that's that's difficult, but I don't think that's the make or the make or break essentially. What I'm thinking more about these days is, as you said, the user journey. How do people or how do patients interact with Mave in the best way possible so that the most people can have access to it as possible, with the with some sort of action that they can take. And for for my background, it's usually okay, if I just give you a piece of data, what does what does the person do with it? You could, okay, maybe I have a friend who knows what that means. Maybe I go to Google and it tells me this is what that means. Um, what is more often the case, for what people trust and for what people desire is that, and for what makes the best outcome, is that the data presented either from a watch or from Mave is connected to your doctor or your healthcare team, whatever that is. And so one thing that I've been thinking hard about is how do you incorporate software like Mave into the ecosystem, the existing healthcare ecosystem without disrupting it, but actually giving your clinicians this extra superpower so that they don't have to have you come in. They don't even have to go to you. They don't have to send you something. But now they're connected to you in this previously impossible way, and they can kind of see how your health is doing, just with video. And so that is a complicated journey because there's multiple different ways you can incorporate into small, medium, large healthcare ecosystems. But it's something that I'm actively working on right now in terms of, as you said, working on partnerships or working on what makes the most sense that I can give it to the most number of people. So that's a good question.
so what about the potential privacy and data security concerns? Because especially involved with health information is very sensitive. So how will
Yeah.
you deal with that concern?
Yeah. Yeah. And there's two ways that existing companies for any type of healthcare information have solved this. One is to use the industry-wide accepted and trusted standards for healthcare security and portability when you're transferring it between different places. There's HIPAA, of course, but there's also different data level protocols like SOC or SOC 1, SOC 2 that give some certainty or guarantee that when you transfer data, You know, if I transfer data from my phone's electronic medical record to my doctor at the hospital, there's some back end work that has guaranteed that when I send it, it's going to be secure in some way. So there's that level of just the back end data security. The second level is where are you sending it to? And so there's actually an interesting side story here. You know, when a company is opting to share your data, you want to make sure that the person or the patient is understanding where it goes. And the example I just gave, you know, if it's just my hospital healthcare app and it's connected to my electronic health record at the hospital, there's a guarantee that it's going directly to the hospital. But there's other cases, more nefarious cases, where a company could be having you opt in to have you check a lot of boxes and your data is going to places where you wouldn't expect. I think we all kind of at this point understand that social media companies have this kind of um, ecosystem already set up. You know, you sign up for Facebook, just as one example, your data isn't only going to Facebook, it's being shared in a lot of different places. What is important for me and important for Maeve is that one, you have the data level secure, but also two, being very, very clear about who you're sending the data to. And so this is actually something I just had a conversation with a very close advisor, and that is how do you make sure once the team grows or the organization grows that you're ensuring that the data or the use of the data is for specifically for medical and health purposes. And there's a couple legal back-end ways that you can do that. I won't go into details, but it starts at the top. So for me, I have to ensure that every instance of the data use is just for health purposes and being clear all the way down to the consumer level. There was a couple of years ago, there was a company based in China, Canada and China. The professor was in Canada, but they also worked in China. And they had a sort of similar software approach, but the data was not specifically being used only for healthcare purposes. It was actually being used to feed and allegedly train kind of biosecurity or personnel scans on security cameras beyond just health information. So they didn't even know they were being scanned. Their security cameras just kind of watching them. And that starts again at the top of an organization on what is your core purpose. And for me, as an MD, medical background, only wanting to give the person the knowledge of the healthcare information, I set that standard for how it trickles down to every single person and every single corporation partnership or a sale that happens in the future. So there's multiple layers of this. It's the individual, there's the data infrastructure, there's who are you giving it to, and then what is your core mission as a company, as a group of people trying to improve health.
Very complicated. I think it's gonna be a huge challenge, right? When you launching Mave to a like mass people in the future.
Right. And then other things to mitigate it is trying to actually just stop data sharing when it's not needed. So if you can process all of the measurements just on the device itself, and the device doesn't have to talk to the internet or talk to the hospital before you get the measurement itself, that is also a very interesting potential outcome, because then everything is measured on the device itself, and you kind of cut out the need to even share it. So you eliminate a lot of the potential abuses when you send something over, the internet, essentially. And so that is another core aspect that I'm working on as well.
Yeah. I'm also curious to know, how did you heard about O'Shaughnessy Venture Fellowship and what made you want to apply for it?
I heard about the OSV fellowship. I want to say it was on LinkedIn. Someone I was connected with had shared it on LinkedIn. It was just a very quick link. Didn't really explain much about it, but I followed it. I followed it to the website, and then I started reading about OSV, started reading about Jim O'Shaughnessy, and I was really kind of captivated by what the program was. The fact that when I applied last year, that was the first year it had started. So there was no one I could really reach out to. Like there's some medical fellowships where it's a long history, is 20 years, and other medical students can tell you about it. Oh yeah, do this one, apply for it. You can get good backing for your research. But this was totally new, so I really had no idea what to make of it. But from the descriptions, from the website, and from everything that I learned or could learn about the team that was available, about Jim that was available, it seemed like there was good intentions through and through, and they were really focused on the person behind whatever project was being proposed. And so that made me decide to apply. And then when I applied, I remember talking to you after I had applied, or we had a first interview or something, and I was just so excited because there was actually a video component of the application process, and I spent countless hours on the video component because I was so excited to make another video talking about video technology. It was this kind of multiple layered thing. And so then, yeah, it just went from there. Awarded the fellowship in July, and then just been working hard on Nave after that.
Yeah. So what are some key goals you set for yourself at the beginning of the fellowship, and how have those evolved over time?
Yeah, so key goals were to So I'll back up a bit because before I was awarded the fellowship, I was trying to establish a partnership with a major academic medical center because that was just what I was familiar with. And I thought that I needed an academic medical center to serve as my, kind of blue chip partner to say, hey, I'm now collecting data. I'm working with this group. And I thought that would make me, uh, legitimate in the eyes of, you know, advisors or other people, potential customers. But what I quickly realized, and then talking to other people who are developing healthcare technologies, is that working with large academic medical centers actually just costs a ridiculous amount of money if you're just a smaller startup or if you're just starting something, more research and development. Uh, for example, I won't name the medical center, but just to have a patient come into that center and be consented to start your research study, not go through the research study, but just consent, say they want to, and then get the ball rolling, can cost anywhere from $900 to $1,500 just to have them say yes if you're working with a large medical center, which is, you know, benefits to working with large medical centers, but a drawback is that unless you're a huge company or just want to spend a lot of money, there's better ways to spend that money. And so what I ended up doing as soon as I got the OSV fellowship is that essentially I established my own research lab, independent. So I still own all the intellectual property. I had full control over how I would bring in research participants, research patients, and be a part of my study. And what that meant was that for the last year, I could have operating costs that are on average 10 times less than what it costs to have just one person come into a large academic medical center study. And they get the added benefit that I'm there every day. So there's this, if you're not familiar with research, clinical research, you can often have anywhere from 6 to 12 different people operating on one research project with a small slice of responsibility across that whole project. But for me, and what made most sense for the OSV fellowship and how I could be a good steward of the funds that I was given, I had already completed multiple research projects with very, very small teams, myself as the lead PI, they call it principal investigator, in medical school. So I knew everything that needed to be done, and I knew I didn't need that huge team, and I knew I could do it myself if I just had the just enough backing and the right place to do it. So with the OSV fellowship, I had the backing, and then I found the right place to do it, had my own lab, intellectual property control, and then I started recruiting all of the participants to come be a part of my study. And it's been very successful so far, hitting all of the monthly milestones for how many people I want to participate in the research study. And as I keep going, just today, I spent about 3 hours before I got on this call looking at just esoteric kind of data, video manipulations on how to actually, progress the software algorithms. And so that was what, yeah. There's a so tangent again. There's a group of very dedicated anime fans. I know this is gonna sound weird, but there's a group of very dedicated anime fans that actually manipulate the original files for anime videos to add their own captions. So maybe it's only Japanese and they want to make it in Portuguese. And so there's actually interesting video research that they do um, that allows them to do their own projects. But I just thought there was interesting kind of ties to all types of video research, including forensic video research, when trials are presented to juries, and was this video real or is it fake? Applications to AI video, generative AI content on, okay, how do we know this is real? Or how do we verify if this was created by a person or an AI system? And then for me, obviously video is a core part of Mave, and so it has had some interesting ties there. So I went down a lot of rabbit holes this morning in terms of just research and development for that. But yes, so I'm very excited about the next year of my development, and then of course all made possible by OSV.
Yeah, so the next step for Maeve after OSV fellowship was your mind. Can you give us some top three plan for the future?
Yeah. So my fellowship period officially ended in August this year. And so I am still now working full-time on Mave and the research and development. My clinical trial is still ongoing, so I'm always enrolling more people to participate. And I'm looking at I'm waiting to hear back from a couple different other grant resources that will help fund some of the participants to come through the research and development. But as I go into the future, the next 1 to 2 years, I am hoping that the algorithm development is at a stage where it can be submitted for official approvals, and that the accuracy is within the range that I'd like it to be, so that it can be deployed more widely in healthcare settings.
That's cool. So what advice would you give to someone considering applying for a fellowship like OSV fellowship, or to a current fellows who want to make the most of their experience with the Oceanus Adventure Fellowship?
Yeah. To people who are applying, I had to spend, before I even sat down and started making the video component or the essays for the application, I had to spend a lot of time, probably 4 or 5 hours, just thinking about what I would do. Because when you submit the application, I feel that OSV and the team is really trying to figure out who is the person, behind this application, and why are they specifically submitting this application? Why not anyone else with maybe a similar pedigree or background? Why not that other person, but why this person specifically? And so you kind of have to think about, outside of maybe any professional or formal or academic experiences, what is the thing that led you to this project, and why does it make so much sense? For me, I think I already mentioned the components, or the aspects of the story is, I had film production experience, I did all these clinical trials in medical school. I also developed, I didn't say this, but I also developed software applications during medical school that all tied together to why it made sense that I would be creating Mave, but also personal experiences in the hospital and then outside of the hospital that I saw where this thing just needed to be brought to life. And so luckily the team also recognized why I wanted to make this happen. And I was awarded it, not not because of the project necessarily, but again, it kept being kind of reiterated that it's more that, you know, we wanted to see the person succeed. So the project, I could have maybe presented a different project, but I think what the OSV hopefully is getting at is, you know, the person behind the project. And I think that really came through in the video and then the essay questions even, and then the various interview rounds. You know, they're trying to figure out who you are. And then for people who have maybe already received the fellowship and they're thinking about how to be successful during their journey, I would say what I did is I I had applied and then was awarded the fellowship with the year-long goals already formulated in my head. But when I was awarded the fellowship, I really had to break down the year-long goals into actionable and obtainable monthly goals, because a year-long goal, kind of high reaching, but I had to actually build the steps to get there. And so then I had to sit down and break it down into the 12 months of what I would actually do to find the research space, to get approvals for the research, to recruit all these people, to make sure that it works on timelines, make sure I have a diverse sample of people recruited in the study, and then to make sure I'm managing the funds correctly. All those things I hadn't thought about in as fine a detail that is required to actually execute each month and then hit those goals. So that's what I recommend to fellowship awardees is break down your kind of lofty 1 year goals into actionable month-long goals that uh, you can actually see the steps like every week, how you would hit that monthly goal. And that's what I had to do.
Yeah, great. Okay, I'll hand over the microphone to the floor. If anyone have any questions to Dr. Sandro Luna, feel free to unmute yourself and ask. I think we
Hey,
have some.
I have a question. Hello. My name's Ben. I'm a personal trainer. I've been like personal trainer for like 10 years. I've just recently started working in a mental health hospital. So I see the benefit there. Like a lot of the time with the mental health patients, uh, actually just like physically touching them, putting a device on their finger, all of that kind of stuff isn't always so easy to do. And so, but doing things across video and even just in a remote way, um, I can see the benefits of the technology. But so you said you're like starting with the blood pressure stuff, but like how many other things in theory can be sort of picked up in using this like pretty sort of simple measurement? Like what other numbers can we pull out from those from that data?
Good question. So yes, kind of the order of operations for what's most important to me, starting again with blood pressure, uh, but also the other vital signs. So heart rate, oxygen saturation. Heart rate, as we've seen with Apple Watch, can be pretty accurate already across different domains. So with video as well, but also, band-based measurements. Heart rate is technically a little bit easier than something like blood pressure, just because for heart rate, you're looking at the the number of times that pulse waveform has blipped in a minute, essentially. And that isn't too much of a technical lift to get there. Whereas for blood pressure, it's a much more kind of a physics-based 3D problem when you're looking at blood flow through a vessel, and thinking back to kind of, for me, high school days of, okay, well, the first principle of physics and figuring out pressure in an elastic or non-elastic tube, essentially a vessel in your arm. There's different equations that you can use there, and there's a lot of good work and research from smaller labs going on what makes the most sense, and that's what I think about a lot. But other potential measurements that I'm also interested in are more blood-based biomarker outcomes. So, for example, hemoglobin, the level of hemoglobin in blood, hemoglobin A1C, which is a marker of the average glucose attached to your red blood cells for diabetes measurements. That's what we usually use to measure diabetes. So the blood-based measurements that are with the most clinical utility, coming from the medical background, are also very interesting to me. Again, as Peter Tia wrote in Outlive, kind of those four horsemen, we think about cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity, stroke, and a lot of those have combined risk factors, namely blood pressure, diabetes, high blood sugar. Yeah.
That's very cool. And obviously they're all of those four horsemen are like linked, because it's all like those kind of lifestyle things, and they will affect the same organs and that kind of thing. But like, what's the is it like the color that you're dealing with there, or is it just like how I don't know, what like the amplitude of it? It's like what's actually being detected?
So there's a lot of different variables for the detection of what you're looking at. If we just take blood pressure, for example, I can't get into the specifics too much, but for blood pressure, thinking about what's most important to Maeve, it's not as easy as just looking at how the color pulses over time, because you also have to think about all of the other variables that make blood pressure unique and individual to each person. And that is a very hard physics question, because you're now trying to isolate variables where you might not have all the information available to you. And so the color is one aspect, but there's multiple other aspects of the person that you have to get involved with as well. How the waveform actually looks, if there's pieces of the waveform that give you certain better information versus other pieces of the waveform. That's been an ongoing kind of byline of other research studies that I have kept tabs on, and it's very hard, but I do think it will be in a place where it can be clinically accurate, and once it does get there, then there's no limit to how you can mobilize it for people to use.
Anyone else have a question?
It's a really lovely idea, but I don't have a clear image of how it works, in the sense that how specific does the video need to be for Maeve to work? Like, do you need to get close-ups of a wrist or a pulse point or something from the video, or are you trying to make it work just off fairly straightforward kind of selfie shots, or how specific is the video going to have to be for this to actually be able to pull data out of the image?
Yeah, great question. And as one example, what I tried to balance when I'm thinking about how should someone interact with the software on their phone, for example, is what are they already used to doing? And so what most people 99% of people with a phone are capable of is holding it up to their face, either for, to unlock their phone or to actually take a selfie or a selfie video of themselves. And so making Mave work in that way, where you can hold it up to your face as an example, and then measure the color change, blood flow, pulse waveform of the face, makes a lot of sense, because you're incorporating the workflow of the software into physical behavior that the person's already used to. Certainly, I always have my phone with me, and it would be much more complicated if you had to have the person hold up the phone to a mirror and then angle it 90 degrees and then bend it to a certain way and oscillate the light. So if you just make it again as easy as holding up the phone to their face, as they already do every day, that's what I'm trying to work on. And using that facial, just the portrait region of the face. Yeah.
Right. That's what you're aiming for. Because there's going to be a trade-off between how easy it is for the customer to use it and what the technology would love them to be able to do to get the maximum information out of it. There's always going to be a painful trade-off there. Ideally, they're using an endoscope and inserting it into their aorta. They're not going to do that. So, the trade-offs are like, how close can you get to actually just ordinary use of the phone? So you're trying to get it pretty close to ordinary use of the phone. Okay, that's cool. If you can make it work.
Yeah. If we wanted the most medically accurate blood pressure, that would be an arterial line into the artery of your arm, and that's just not even in the question of doing that to millions of people if you wanted an instantaneous read. But yeah, it's always the trade-off of what does the device do versus what does the device need. You're right. You're exactly right.
Do you have an insight into this, or a software breakthrough in this area that just makes this more possible for you than for anybody else? Like, do you have a?
Yeah, so it's funny how my background from documentary filmmaking and then the software that I made throughout medical school for iPhones kind of converged for Mave. And so there's so I've looked at all of the existing literature on this type of pulse waveform measurements or extraction. And there's very well-intentioned research groups across the country and the world that have similar motivations on letting millions of people kind of access these vital signs just from a phone. And I think more people should work on it. I think it's a very important thing to do. That's why I'm working on it. But if you look at the research and the published literature and the data that's been collected, there is there's a core set of flaws in the published literature that limit the physical the physical outputs of any type of software-based measurement. And I have that list, of course, but it's currently being evaluated in other opportunities that I'm working on for collaborations. But for one example, I can tell you is that you'd be surprised on how many people in a data set for this type of work in another institution or another research group only include healthy people. And so if you just take 1 second to think about, if the data set only includes healthy people, the output of whatever you're making is very limited to what you're seeing in healthy people. And so for me, that's actually that's a big aha moment for me. It's one of many of those lists of evaluations on the drawbacks, but I think it's very clear to even someone who's not familiar with the research to say, okay, if you only have healthy people, how are you going to get a non-healthy value out of your output? And this is the same for research that you might have seen on facial recognition. There's a story about HP computers, and they had a laptop that was working on facial recognition for the webcam. And there's this famous video that went viral where they had a African American coworker step in front of the camera. I couldn't recognize his face, and then they had their European white, pale skin toned coworker step in front of the camera and immediately recognize the person. All right, and so you can just see how immediate the importance of who's in your data set makes for something as simple as just recognize the face versus something more complicated as recognize a vital sign. And so
you're building out your own data set. That's what you're doing.
So yes, so
Like,
that's part of the clinical research.
There's no commercially available data set you can tap into because you need all the facial stuff to be tied to the actual. So you've got to register all the data by some other method so you can match it to the face, right?
Right. So there's some commercial data sets, especially for things like video games, where there will be facial video sets to measure expressions. So, you know, hey, let's have 50 people like smile for our video game so that we can get a good representation of what a smile looks like when we make our character, you know.
But you don't have their blood pressure or their heart rate, so you
don't have anything
train it.
linked to it. So you got it. Yeah.
So you're building it from scratch. Like you have to build the whole data set from yourself, which is good actually, because if everybody already had the data sets, they'd have a head start over you. So this is probably a good thing.
I believe so. Yeah.
Wow. So you're gonna have to film a lot of people and register a lot of heartbeats and blood pressure to build up your own set.
It's a lot of work, and
healthy and sick.
yeah, healthy versus non-healthy, but I have a lot of fun with it. And the people who come to my research study, you know, they work with me. I don't have anyone, I don't hire someone else, because I think it's important that the leader of the research project is actually working with the people of the research project. And I was surprised that the most number of people who come to my research study, they're not coming from social media, something that they saw on Instagram. They're not coming from XYZ. They're actually coming from a friend or family member told them about my study, and they thought it was important enough and of value to them that they wanted to come participate. And so that's actually something that's very hard to replicate in other clinical research studies. And that's recruitment is the biggest challenge. 40% of clinical trials fail to reach their recruitment target. And so for me, it means a lot that all these people are referring their friends and family to come and participate, because they see the value and they say, oh yeah, I would want that for my mom or my parent. I'll help you with the research and I love the benefits. So yeah, let's do it. So that's been important for me, really exciting to see, and going to keep on working that recruitment, you know, into the next year for research and development. So very good questions and important to me.
Hey everyone. I really enjoyed the insights on what you're doing, and it sounds like it has tremendous potential. It feels like more people should hear about this. I was wondering if you thought streaming this, I know there's probably going to be a recording because it says it's recording, but have you considered streaming this live to other platforms at the same time? There's, like you're saying, people are just contacting you because they want to join. Just a thought.
I'm not sure if I can answer the question correctly, but maybe Camellia, I was just kind of joining on because I wanted to share my fellowship experiences, what I was working on. I don't know if OSV wants to share it, or if we can talk about that later, but I know that they have other fellows and other people doing similar talks like this that I think are available to at least our community, right?
Yeah. So if you need like a recruit people to participate in your research, I think OSV gonna help you out. If if we get your approval, and we can definitely share this conversation on the social media platform, and maybe later if you need to reach them mass media or you need more people to join you, we can help you out. Good point.
Oh, thank you. I interpreted Paul's question as if the OSV or InterIntellect was simultaneously streaming this on other platforms. I don't think we are. I think it's just InterIntellect, Zoom, just to make a more kind of fireside chat setting.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll share this recording just within OSV
Right.
community.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but later if any fellows need any marketing help, or if we want to promote your project, yeah, OSV can definitely help.
Does that answer your question, Paul?
It does. I think there's maybe, it seems like there's still a bit of a gap. I think we're more or less answering the question, because I think there's a lot of value, and for you, like you said, how does OSV kind of promote in general? And it wasn't about promoting me. I don't have a research. I think that's what I understood you saying, Camille. I don't have a research to promote. I just think what Sandro just shared was cool. And a lot of people, like, I think the part that really kind of crystallizes interest for me is when you say there are some people who are traveling or who just want to participate, who are just asking. And when you have like things like that, it's cool to share broadly.
Oh, yeah, I see. Yeah. Yeah. And if there's an opportunity, I know that if I seek OSV's help, it's kind of sharing more broadly some kind of help with recruitment in that regard. As she just said, I know they're very happy to kind of work with that.
Full disclosure, sorry for interrupting. We've built like a live interactive video platform, but that's unrelated to the fact that you can restream from Zoom to Instagram or X, and then I mean, I don't know if I would actually, it's a good point. Maybe people who are here don't want to be publicly visible on LinkedIn or social media right now.
Yeah. That was my understanding of the kind of keep it a small group session, ask anything, question and answer. So yeah, I'm happy to be here. I'm glad everyone has such great questions. And yeah, if anyone else has another question that's lingering, I'm happy to answer that one too.
I've got a question. On the topic of recruiting people for clinical trials, right? You shared that unfortunate statistic about the difficulty. And I know like clinicaltrials.gov is not necessarily a great user experience, right? Or the easiest thing to navigate. Have you found that there are others in this ecosystem who are working on solving that particular problem that maybe have been helpful to you as you've sought? I know you were saying there's a lot of word of mouth going on and finding people to enroll, but just curious if you've seen anything out there that is particularly novel.
Oh, there are entire nonprofit organizations. There are entire large companies and startups and research groups in hospitals all over the world who dedicate their lives to figure out how do you recruit people successfully for clinical trials. And so that's actually, I've actually helped other groups think about this question. And so there's a couple different ways to approach it. Again, 40% don't hit the target. There's the question of, I would say, well, first I'll back up. Are you interested in your own life or work and trying to figure out how to recruit people?
Yeah, so full disclosure. So I do work for a biopharma company.
Yeah.
I lead our strategic foresight practice, so it looks at a ton of different things. So I don't always necessarily have all the time in the world to dive into some of these like specific topics. So I'm just curious from your experience if there's anything that stuck out.
Yeah. And so because you're coming from, I think, the field, you'll understand some of this lingo. So there's a difference between, for everybody, recruitment and enrollment. And recruitment is, in my view, just how do you make sure people know about the study and kind of get a foot in the door. But then enrollment is actually if they actually physically sign up and stay in your trial. And so there's different methods and technologies and systems that have helped people both recruit and enroll people in their study. When I've said recruitment in the past hour or so, I'm actually referring to both letting people know about the study and then also having them go all the way through the study. So when I say recruitment, I just meant both. But for your purpose, Travis, I think it's also helpful to know that recruitment and then enrollment have slightly different challenges. For recruitment's to me kind of a little bit easier than enrollment. So I'll just talk about enrollment. For everyone, if you want, this kind of applies to anyone working on a startup or a research project or an interview system or a video documentary or anything that you need other people to give input on. It's one thing to get your idea in front of people, but then to actually have them participate is another. So for Travis, we'll talk about enrollment, getting people involved. For other people, if you just have a different project altogether. Enrollment is often based on the intrinsic properties of the thing you're doing. And so for a biopharma company, that can mean anything from what does the actual trial involve? Is it a one-time visit? Is it a 6-time multi-part interventional injection thing that has to go on? For a documentary, do you need someone to talk to you just for 2 minutes on the street, or do you need them to sit down with you for an hour in a hotel lobby in a nondescript location because your subject matter is, you know, politically involved? It doesn't matter what it is, but you have to think about intrinsic properties of what you're doing and then make a trade-off with your own data in terms of, okay, how many people do we need and how many people can we realistically get for what we're asking for? And the hospital where I used to work for medical school, I participated in a lot of studies and I would limit myself to the ones I wanted to participate in, right? So I would be happy to go to a study that, you know, did a blood draw, weighed me, made me run for maybe 10 minutes for a health study. And they paid me, I don't know, $20 to $50 for that for an hour or two. But if you're going to ask me, or maybe even an older person, to go into a hospital and do a spinal tap and get a big needle stuck in your back, that's a huge trade-off. And you're either going to have to pay them a lot to do that or figure out some benefit where it makes sense for that person to be a part of that study. So enrollment is often, in my opinion, more linked to the intrinsic properties of what you're actually asking someone to do. And you have to make it worthwhile. That's just, I think that's fair for the patient. And I think that's just fair on a human level, where if you're going to ask someone to donate their time or resources or body to something, you have to make it fair. And so that's what I really spent a lot of time working on, making it fair and valuable. And that's why I think I've also had a lot of success. So I'd encourage you to think about it in that way as well. Recruitment, you can blast a lot, you can pull a lot of levers, but enrollment and for having people stay in the trial, that's what I'd think about.
So I think our time is up. And if people want to connect with you or ask you more questions, where can they find you, Sandro?
Yeah, LinkedIn's best. I respond to messages on LinkedIn. And yeah, I think it's just easiest to find me there. And OSV is linked to me a couple of times.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you very much, Sandro, for your input in this conversation. Much appreciated.
Thank you
and
for
all the
listening.
best for your future journey.
Thank you. Thank you all. It's good to see you. And thank you for your good questions. I appreciate it. It's good to see you.
And thank you,
Thanks a
everyone.
lot.
Thank you. Bye.